Welcome back, everyone. It is Eric from Rare Candy, and today we finally have the full set reveal for Raging Surf. So this is going to be Japan's latest set coming out, though this is not going to be the one that has like all of the Paradox Pokemon that we've been seeing lately. That one is going to release in Japan next month, and then that set plus this one will be combined for our Paradox Rift set come this November. Now, even though this doesn't have any of the Paradox Pokemon or any of that, there still are a handful of actually pretty important cards that we're going to be getting in this set. So I definitely want to check these out and see how Paradox Rift is going to be shaping up as a result. Now, before we get into the rest of today's video, just a little bit of housekeeping. Of course, as always, remember to smack that like button, feed that always hungry YouTube algorithm. And in case you missed it, there is actually some new merch dropping over at rarecandytcg.com. Personally, guys, I'm pretty stoked on these. I just really love the way both these playmat designs came out. And of course, a big shout out to everyone who already picked one up. Currently, there are still a handful left up for pre-order, so if you do want to grab one and help support the channel, I'll have a link down below in the description. So we'll kick things off though with Froslass EX. This was, I think, actually among one of the first cards that we saw get revealed from this set. But of course, it's a grass type Froslass, has this ability. When this Pokemon is in the active and is knocked out, you flip a coin. If heads, your opponent takes one less prize card for that knockout. So you're effectively a one prize, 250 HP Pokemon. That alone, not too bad. Its attack, you know, it's not the heaviest hitting thing in the world, but for 2 water does 140, and then 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. I mean, I'm not honestly sure how often the 20 snipe is going to matter, but the 140 on its own is okay. You know, it's a nice 2-shotting number against stage 1 EXs and of course Pokemon V-Star. But in terms of hitting Pokemon for grass weakness, I think Charizard's really the big one people are going to be thinking about. But my issue here is that you're actually not even one-shotting Charizard. You would have to actually have like a Defiance band. But I think my issue with this card is a lot of the times this ability, you know, you're just going to flip tails. And at that point, you're just a 250 HP, 2 prize Pokemon that's hitting for 140. Like, it's also kind of a pain to power up to because Palkia can't power this thing up. Palkia can only accelerate to water Pokemon. So that means we will have to use something like a Baxcalibur. And are we really jamming Froslass into Baxcalibur and Champao and all that? I don't think so. So I think this card seems kind of mediocre for the moment. It's not bad, but I definitely don't think is near the power level of some of the other popular attackers that we have right now. Okay, so we do have a new Octillery. This was another one I'm pretty sure that we saw in advance, but has this ability whenever you play this card from hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you draw 3 cards, and the attack honestly isn't that great. So, I mean, we've seen this ability before. There was actually, I think it was a Manectric back during the Sword and Shield era that had this ability. Card never saw any play at all. I don't think there's too much incentive to play this as well. I think the only sort of like maybe saving grace for a card like this is the fact that you can get it with Irida. And like the big issue with Irida is that you're not really seeing a lot of cards in a given turn. Like, yeah, you can find, you know, that one Pokemon that you need or that one item, but a lot of the time you're not really seeing a lot of cards. So I think there is an argument to be made where it's like, okay, you just play this in a deck that plays Irida. That way you can get additional value out of your Irida from time to time and see additional cards. I think that's sort of the argument to be made here, though. I would just probably not play this and just play like Burrell or like Revavroom or something like that instead, because you can use those abilities repeatedly. But the fact this is only a one-time thing leads me to believe this card is probably not going to be that great. All right, so next up we have Garchomp EX, which is a card that is, I think, a little bit heartbreaking if I'm being honest, because as you'll see, I really want to love this card, but there are some issues that this thing is going to have. So, you know, it's a water type Garchomp, which is kind of cool, I suppose. And I actually do think this is one of the few Terra Pokemon where the type shifted type it gets actually is like a really smart combination with the type of energy it requires, because, you know, if you're going to be weak to lightning here, well, most lightning Pokemon are going to be weak to fighting. So that means you can probably play some sort of fighting Pokemon in your deck to cover your weakness, which again, I think is really cool. I think a lot of the times these Terra Pokemon sort of miss out on those sorts of interactions. But anyways, let's take a look at the rest of the card. The first attack for a fighting does 160, so that's already a green flag. That's already pretty sick. But then you attach up to 3 fighting energy from your discard pile to your bench Pokemon in any way that you like. So this is, I think, a really cool attack. It's really energy efficient, and you can also power up maybe some bigger secondary attackers, maybe like a Ting Lu or, you know, like a Koraidon or something like that as well. You can also play Cheryl with this thing too, because you can Cheryl, get rid of your energy, reattach your energy, and then accelerate the one you just discarded to a Pokemon on the bench. So yeah, overall, I love this attack. I think this is really cool here. And then its other one for 2 colorless, you discard 2 energy from this Pokemon and does 120 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So like, not a great attack by any means, guys, but it does actually set up some decent math on V-Stars, because if you are hitting for 160 and they retreat their Arceus or their Giratina, whatever it might be, you can just attach 1 more energy and use this attack to pick them off on the bench. So I think overall Garchomp is just like a really fair, well-designed card, but you know, I think honestly its biggest issue it's going to face in the short term is the lightning weakness that it has. Because you got to think Lost Box is not going anywhere right now. That's not changing after the set releases. Well, more on that later. Lost Box definitely could face some new challenges, but I think Lost Box is still going to be popular. Basically all of those lists are going to be playing Raikou, so that's already something that is going to be able to one-shot Garchomp. Miraidon, especially right now, is really picking up a lot of steam and becoming a much more popular deck. That's going to give you some issues, though. I guess we could make the argument that we can play fighting Pokemon to counter them. So, you know, we'll have to see about that. Then there's still other decks, though, like Giratina that can knock you out with Star Requiem. I think Garchomp in a vacuum is actually a really sick card. I really am rooting for this card to be good, because this is really the exact type of deck that I think needs to be better in the TCG. Like, we're starting to get better stage 2s with Gardevoir, of course, being a decent example, but we really have very few strong stage 2 attackers like this. So short term, I think Garchomp faces some challenges, but that is something that could maybe change over time. So we do have a new Golisopod here. So Golisopod does have an attack. There's 20 for each card in your opponent's hand. Now, there definitely are a few decks out there that try to amass a large hand size. Both Gardevoir and Lost Zone decks are guilty of this. So maybe you can capitalize on that and take some big knockouts with Golisopod here. You know, I don't think we're building around this attack though, guys, just because it is something your opponent can play around. I think if you were to ever use something like this would be maybe like a Zoroark toolbox sort of option maybe, but I really don't think this is needed. Like, I don't think this covers any sort of matchup that you already can't cover with other cards. So card's not bad, it's just kind of meh. So we have a Lantern, and this is not a card I recognize from before, so I think this is actually our first time seeing this one. Aqua Spark looks like it does 80 plus 120 more if this Pokemon has a water energy. Okay, so this definitely seems to me like a Zoroark Toolbox style card we would want to use. You can transform into this thing, slap down reversal energy, and hit for 200. I mean, that seems fine, but I think we have other cards that already sort of, you know, fill a similar role. We already have the Raichu that can hit lightning weak Pokemon for weakness. We also have the Satitan that can hit for 220. Like, you definitely could play the card, but there's just other options for Zoroark decks that probably are just a little bit better for the moment. So Plusle for 2 colorless does 10 plus 10 more for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So we actually see this attack pop up, you know, I won't say a lot, but it's kind of a reoccurring attack that we see every now and again. Now, the one thing I do like about Plusle here specifically is that it's actually a lightning type. You know, if I remember right, we have this attack on a Zangoose and also on, I think, a Farfetch'd right now as well, if my memory serves me correctly. But the upside, of course, to Plusle is that you can actually hit stuff for weakness, whereas colorless Pokemon cannot. So I don't really know what deck we're playing this in. I guess you, in theory, could play this in something like Lost Box, since you are just chipping away at your opponent's Pokemon, but not an awful card, but definitely very fringe, I would say. Okay, and of course, as you would expect, there is a Minun to go along with Plusle. So this thing has an ability, if you have Plusle in play, whenever your opponent attaches an energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So I guess in theory, if you're going against something like a Baxcalibur deck, this actually would be pretty annoying, because every time they do charge up their Pokemon, they are going to have to damage themselves. And I think what they're trying to push here is, you know, something like that's going to happen, and then you come in with the Plusle that we just looked at, to finish off your opponent's Pokemon, but you're probably not really doing that much damage with this ability. A lot of the time, again, outside of Back's caliber, it's a cool effect. This could be, good for like a pre-release or something like that, but I don't think this is good enough for a standard format though. Okay, so next up we have an EX that was not previously revealed. We have Tapu Koko EX here. So Lightning Colorist is 30. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an attack during your opponent's last turn, does 90 more, and they are paralyzed. Okay, that's actually not too bad, I have to say. So obviously you can play this in your Miraidon decks out there, or even in Lost Box. I don't think seems awful, if I'm being honest. But I could definitely see this being good in either sort of deck, because I think a lot of times with both these archetypes, you're not taking like big one-hit KOs. So if you're able to just come in with Koko on certain turns, paralyze your opponent and soften them up, well, you can maybe buy a turn where they can't attack, and you can come in on your next turn and finish them off with a different Pokemon, or even just throw down one more energy and knock them out with this second attack that we have here. I'm just not sure if this is going to get overshadowed by Zapdos EX, which we're getting in 151, which kind of does a similar thing. Like, the big issue with Miraidon is that outside of your Raichus, you really can't one-shot stuff, and Zapdos can come in and clean up those knockouts for you, while also pressuring a different Pokemon in play. So maybe Zapdos is just better than this, the more I'm talking about it. Does take less energy. I think that's the upside to Koko, but card is okay. Not sold on it just yet, but it's okay. Okay, we do have a new Groudon here. So Groudon says attach a basic fighting from your hand to one of your Pokemon, and then 2 fighting colors. You discard up to 4 energy from your Pokemon to 60 for each discarded in this way. Maybe this could be like, I guess, a Garchomp partner in theory. That sort of seems to be like the vibe they're giving off here, because you attack with Garchomp, it powers up Groudon for you immediately, and then you can come in with Groudon, finish them off. It only gives up 1 prize, so actually doesn't seem that awful if we're being honest here. I guess also if some sort of Lost Box ever played Fighting Energy, this could be like a Lost Box, sort of partner here. Outside of Garchomp though, I think the other uses for this card definitely seem a little bit more bleak. And even in Garchomp, like, what fighting Pokemon do we want? Like, to me, Ting-Lu seems like the natural sort of partner due to its disruption that it has, and also is more than likely going to cover your weakness too. But, I could be wrong. Groudon definitely could make some sense. It definitely hits harder than Ting-Lu does. So maybe there's a world where this could be like a one of in Garchomp. Okay, next up we have Hoopa EX. This was a card that we already did see get revealed, and is kind of like the inverse of Garchomp EX. And what I mean by that is Garchomp does have a really nice interaction between its new typing and the normal energies it would normally require, but Hoopa is kind of the opposite. I don't think there's any cool synergy between taking dark energy and being a fighting type, because you don't really have a great way at getting powered up with Hoopa. But circle back around to that in just a minute. I think the attack to hone in on is going to be this first one. Does 50 for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon in play. So I think this is definitely uniquely good against decks like Arceus or Miraidon, where they are flooding their energy into play and you're also hitting them for weakness. I don't know of too many other decks that right now that are aiming to just flood a ton of energy in play. Like maybe Mew VMAX decks with Elisa Sparkles. Like if they do commit their energy in play, maybe you could capitalize on that with Hoopa. But definitely would argue there are easier ways to counter Mew if that is your goal. If you do want to use this attack, I think our options right now are kind of limited. You are going to have to use something like Raihan to get that extra dark energy. Because of course, Dark Patch just won't work on this. It only works with dark Pokemon, not fighting types. So we'll have to do that. Or I think maybe the other option is like Galarian Moltres combined with like Energy Switch. Because you really don't want to like preemptively bench Hoopa, because then if your opponent sees what you're trying to do, they can just boss it up, knock it out in advance. So if we're not really benching this thing down and taking a KO with it in the same turn, card's just not that good. So I think Hoopa, it's got a cool attack, but just kind of unfortunate typing though. So next up we have a Minior that actually has a really interesting ability here. So it says once during your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, when you attach an energy from your hand to this Pokemon, you may switch it with your active. So it kind of has like jet energy built into its ability, but you can activate it with any energy, not just jet energy. So, I mean, what's the deck we're trying to play this for, though? That's like, I guess, the issue I have with this. The thing that I could maybe see is like attackers where, like the old Golisopod GX, where you had to move from the bench to the active spot to get its damage increase. So I think attackers like that, Minior actually could maybe make some sense, because it's just like a persistent sort of like pseudo switching option that you have in play. But I don't know of too many Pokemon or cards like that right now. Feel free to correct me down below in the comment section if there's a card I'm forgetting, or maybe there's something in the set that we're going to stumble upon that would pair nicely here, but I'm just not sure what deck is really asking for this right now. And I will say this too, the other issue this card has that I didn't even recognize till now, it does have a 2 retreat cost. So if you are trying to use this as like a switching method, if you attach, let's say, just a grass energy for the sake of example, and move Minior to the active to reset some sort of Pokemon to your bench, well, you still can't actually retreat your Minior unless you have Beach Court in play too. So the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm just starting to not like this card. Okay, so we have a new cloth, and this attack actually isn't that bad that it has. So for 2 colorless energy is 30, plus 160 more if this Pokemon has a special condition affecting it. So let's see, so it's 190, then if you're using double turbo energy, so you're hitting for 170, which honestly is not a bad energy to damage ratio. You're going to one-shot Lumineon V. Of course, you're going to one-shot Fighting Weak Pokemon as well. But I guess the question is, how are we getting the special condition? There was something that was being hyped with the, what was it, the Hisuian Electrode V back in Astral Radiance, or was that Lost Origin? I forget. But there was a Pokemon that came out, I'm pretty sure in the same set, that could make both active Pokemon affected by a condition. Oh, it was Parasect, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. It makes, I think, both actives poison and confused, I think it is. Okay, if that's the case, I guess you could play that with Cloth. There is also the, what is it called? The Spicy Seasoned Curry that could burn yourself. Yeah, this attack is okay. It's not, like, energy-wise, it's not that hard to power up, but this seems probably not that great, though, overall. So we do have a Flamigo here. It does 20 plus 20 more for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So this definitely could be a good Miraidon killer if we ever get some sort of deck that can splash this in. Something like Lost Box is definitely sort of what comes to mind if we ever do see a more fighting energy based version of Lost Box. Though I would also kind of argue too that you already have other attackers in just normal Lost Box right now that can deal with Miraidon. So I don't know where this card would slot in, but I don't think it's awful. I'm just not sure really like what deck would be really asking for this right now though. So we do have a new Gengar here, though I gotta say, I'm actually not sure who this artist is. This must be like a newer artist for the TCG, because I don't really recognize their style that they have here. But anyways, the ability though, it says once during your turn, you may switch your active with one of your bench Pokemon. So this is the same ability back on, I believe it was Solgaleo GX, the first one that came out. Also kind of similar to the Decidueye EX that we just got as well. But honestly guys, I don't see this card doing a whole lot. Like Solgaleo had a good ability, but no deck, from what I can recall, ever splashed that into their deck for the switching effect. You gotta think too, guys, if we're playing a stage 2, you could use all of these deck spaces. Like, you have to think 3 deck spaces minimum for essentially a switch. You could just cut all of these and just play more copies of Switch, Escape Rope, etc. I think, you know, the only way I could see this card maybe being good at some point is if we get maybe some sort of Gengar EX that synergizes with this ability, because then if you're already playing Ghastlies and Haunters, it's not that hard to splash in maybe like one of these into your deck at that point. But yeah, for the moment, otherwise, I'm really not a big fan of this card. So we do have a new Yveltal, has the Crosscut attack, does 30 plus 60 more if your opponent's active is an evolution. So, you know, in theory, this could have been kind of a cool attack because we definitely have some dark, weak evolution Pokemon running around. Of course, the big ones being Gardevoir EX and also Mew VMAX. you know, even though we can power this up with a double turbo energy, even if we ignore the double turbo energy reduction for a second, we're only hitting for 180 with weakness. And that's just not good enough. There's plenty of other ways to two-shot these sorts of Pokemon without shoving in an Yveltal that's otherwise worthless into our deck in the process. And I don't think we're playing this for its attack either. Like, if we were ever going to play some sort of dark energy-based single prize basic, Galarian Moltres is just better. It's the same attack cost, but it can also power itself up, and you have the potential for much higher damage in the mid and late game. So unless there's something I'm just totally missing when it comes to this first attack, I think this card seems pretty weak. Alrighty, so we do have a new Thievul here with a slightly annoying ability, it looks like. So whenever we evolve into it, we get to look at our opponent's hand, choose 2 energy cards we find there, and put them back into our opponent's deck. So, I mean, putting energy back into your opponent's deck, honestly, against a lot of decks kind of helps them. Like if it's Mew v Max, if they have Fusion Strike energies, they would rather have those in deck to be able to use Alisas. If they're a Lost Box deck, they would want them in deck to be able to use their Mirage Gates. You know, with Lugia, they want to accelerate them with Archeops. So now where I could see this attack maybe being useful is in some sort of like hand locking deck where you're playing things like Snatch Arm. Snatch Arm, I believe, gets a Pokemon and puts it at the bottom of their deck. So if you go like let's say you're playing the new Arbok EX from 151. If you, let's say, Judge Rai honor them down to a low hand size, use Snatch Arm to get rid of a Pokemon, use Thievul to get rid of some energy, and then use Arbok's attack to sort of just destroy the rest of their hand. Like, that's where I could see Thievul maybe being useful, but I don't think this ability is disruptive enough on its own to warrant ever playing, especially since it's a stage 1. I think it would have to be part of some other broader hand locking strategy. Otherwise, your opponent's just going to laugh and not really care whenever you do this to their hand. And a lot of times, you're just not going to see anything in your opponent's hand either. Alrighty guys, up next we have the savior of the format, or hopefully at least, we have Jirachi here. So I imagine a lot of you guys are already familiar with what this card does, but it's seeing a lot of hype, I think rightfully so too, because of this ability. Attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon can't put damage counters on your benched Pokemon. So this is a very specific attack that we have here, but I think one that is still really good because, of course, it's going to stop Sableye. That's the big card that this Jirachi is sort of hating on with this. You know, I think I've seen a lot of people, myself included, even talk about how we need some sort of like Manaphy style basic Pokemon that can stop Sableye in the same way that Manaphy can stop Radiant Greninja. And this is, you know, almost exactly that sort of effect here. So for all of you out there like myself who enjoy like the United Wings deck, the Zoroark Toolbox deck, stuff like that, these single prize and sometimes evolution based decks, I think are going to love this card because now, instead of just saying, well, I lose to Lost Box, so deck's unplayable, now you actually have a pretty easy way to tech for that matchup. Now, that being said, there are some strings attached to Jirachi, which I think is actually probably fair. This is only limited to your bench Pokemon, so that means Sableye can still knock out your active if that's the most important target for them anyways. And this is only limited to basic Pokemon, so that means other attacks from evolutions that can take knockouts via effects of an attack, like you know, like Star Requiem on Giratina as an example, aren't going to be affected by this. And I do think that is really smart in terms of how they have designed this card. And also, even other decks that previously were already playable could even think about maybe playing different basics if they're playing Jirachi in their deck. So what I mean by that is, if you're a deck that is playing like a 70 HP basic, like let's say you're playing Charizard EX and you want to switch to the new 70 HP Charmanders coming out in 151 because Sableye can't pick them both off at the same time. Well, now instead, maybe you could play some of the better 60 HP ones instead if you're going to be playing Jirachi as well, since they're going to be protected by this effect. So yeah, just all around, big thumbs up for this card. I think this is actually going to be probably the best card of the set, even though it's literally just a common, as you can see here in Japan. But yeah, Jirachi, so stoked for this card to come out. I think we have really been needing an effect like this, but I don't think this is also going to be the end of Lost Box either. I know this is kind of a side tangent altogether. Lost Box definitely could still adapt by playing higher counts of bosses orders. They could play cross switchers, they could play canceling Cologne. So Jirachi is not going to be, I think, a silver bullet, but it definitely forces Lost Box decks to change their lists around to adapt in ways that they really don't want to be doing. So yeah, absolutely stoked on Jirachi. Favorite card of this set, I think by far for me personally. So we have a new Ferrothorn. So let's see. Takes 30 less from attacks. Okay, pointless. Then she only have 140 HP. And then 50, then 100 more if we use this attack next turn. Okay, so this card is absolutely terrible. Like, Ferrothorn's just one of those Pokemon that if you see it gets printed in a set, you can just almost bet money on the fact that it's going to be terrible. Like, this Pokemon has existed since, what, Black and White now at this point? So, well over a... Is it over a decade now? Yeah, it's been over a decade. It's yet to get a good card. And this one's not going to change that either, it appears. Okay, so we do have Aegislash, which is a card that I think a lot of people probably are already familiar with, but it has actually the same ability that Mimikyu has, but it is on a stage 2. Now, there are definitely some pros and cons that we have here, because Mimikyu, even though it's a basic Pokemon, it's not that tanky and can be pretty easily knocked out by the Pokemon that can get through this ability. Whereas Aegislash, you know, something like Cramorant's not going to knock it out. Something like Sableye is not going to knock this out. So Aegislash is actually probably a little bit better against the cards that could theoretically counter this ability. And it does have a better attack as well. For Metal Colorist is 120 and goes through any effects on your opponent's active. But of course, guys, is this worth jumping through the hoops of getting into a stage 2? You know, I still think, honestly, right now, there are probably too many ways for decks to get around this effect. We have decks like Gardevoir that have plenty of single prize attackers that can get through this. Of course, Lawsome decks have plenty of single prize attackers. MuVimax has a Shred style attack. Duraludon has a Shred style attack. Giratina V has a Shred style attack. So even though I don't think this being a stage 2 is like a death sentence for this card, I think the bigger issue is that there's just too many cards that can get around this. But, you know, maybe after another rotation, this could be a card to maybe revisit as we lose more and more of these Pokemon that can easily get around this. So we do have a new Zacian, which I think is like almost a decent card. It does have the Iron Howl attack. Does 30, and you attach a basic metal from your discard to one of your bench Pokemon. I think this attack is like almost good. My issue with it, though, is that you're really not getting ahead with this. And what I mean by that is if you're attaching an energy to your Zacian to power up a Pokemon on the bench, well, you could have just attached this energy to that Pokemon on the bench. So if this attack had been like 2 metal, well, then you are sort of getting ahead. And I would like that a bit more too, because metal Pokemon really don't have great acceleration right now. And outside of like Magnezone, which isn't that great already, or having to jam in like the whole Lost Engine into your deck, these types of Pokemon really are without a good way of getting set up. So Zacian, you're kind of close, my dude, but not quite good enough, unfortunately. Okay, so we do have Orthworm here. So does 240 if there's 3 or less cards remaining in your deck. Now, I do think that is a bit of a tall ask, though. You could play this in some sort of Lost Zone deck. I don't think that is out of the question. I think your attack cost is certainly flexible enough. And you could even play this kind of like in the way that we see Kyogre get played. Like as the Lost Zone player, you're essentially just trying to turbo through your deck and deck yourself as quick as possible to set up for like the energy recycler, you know, Mirage Gate play with your Kyogre. Same thing sort of applies here. Instead of maybe taking your final couple prizes via a spread attack, maybe you could take them via this heavier hitting attack. It unfortunately is not good enough against like V-Stars and a lot of like the stage 1 EXs, but it will at least knock out pretty much any basic EX or basic Pokemon V. So that's something it does have going for it. So I think there is some fringe potential to this card, but doesn't stand out to me as being particularly great though. Alrighty, next up we have Golden Go EX, or guys, feel free to correct me in the comments. Is it Goldengo EX or is it Golden Go EX? Feel free to let me know. Still don't know how we pronounce this dude, but actually I think one of the more promising new attackers that we have in this set. So its ability, it's like the old Slurpuff from the XY era. You draw a card, but if it's in the active spot, you draw 2 cards instead. So in theory, if we have 4 of these guys in play, you're drawing, and if one of them is in the active spot, you're drawing 5 cards at a minimum. So if you have switching cards and escape ropes and stuff like that, you can even get above that. So that is pretty cool, even on its own. But the attack is also, I think, really solid here. For just a single metal energy, you discard any number of basic energy from your hand and does 50 for each card discarded in this way. So I think this ability and this attack, they pair up pretty perfectly because you're chucking away energy every turn, and you are going to need to be able to refill your hand size turn after turn to be able to keep doing that high amount of damage. So between this thing and maybe you play something like the Eldegoss or even like Burrell, you can just keep seeing a lot of cards every turn to keep fueling this attack that we have here. And also, guys, I think this card could be a contender. I think the only thing it really has to worry about is going to be Judge Path or Ionopath in the late game. It's very much like Qian Pao in the way that it sort of lives and dies by its ability to be able to expand its hand size. And the late game, it definitely could face some challenges. But again, that is where things like Burrell or Eldegoss or even something like the Corollia engine could come into play here. And one thing I do like too about this card is that it doesn't specify metal energies here. It's only basic. So that means you could even play things like Radiant Charizard in your deck plus a fire energy or a couple fire energies. You can search those out maybe with the Eldegoss, like I already mentioned, for the turns that you might need it. So I think this card is actually really promising. Definitely, I think maybe even better than Garchomp in terms of being the best attacker that we've seen in this set. So Meta Pokemon are on a roll. Between this and Jirachi, they are sort of running this Raging Surf set, it seems. We have Bombardier EX. This was another very early reveal from the set. And I really want to like this card, but I'm not quite there. So its attack here for a colorless energy, if you go first, you can use this attack on your first turn, search your deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. So I love this effect. This is sort of addressing one of the big complaints I've been having with a lot of cards that do things like this, especially in the supporter realm, because these styles of attacks are good, but we're now in an era of the game where you can't attack on turn 1. But now the fact that we can even use this going first in the game actually does give this card a lot more playability than it would otherwise have. Now, I wish there was a supporter that did this. I would definitely much prefer that, because being a Pokemon does pose some challenges. This means you have to be playing a deck that is playing a lot of Pokemon with free retreat to be able to get this into the active, or you have to be playing a deck that plays a high amount of switching cards, because otherwise, guys, you still have to find an energy to be able to use this attack. If this was a 0 energy attack or even an ability, I think that would be substantially better. The other way I can see to maybe get around this is with the, was it Furisode Girl? Or I don't know how you pronounce that supporter, but it's the one where you search your deck for a basic and switch it into your active spot. So you could, in theory, even play that plus a Lumineon and immediately guarantee this thing in the active. But at that point, you have a Lumineon and a Bombardier in play, which you probably don't want. I almost feel that right now, at least, Battle VIP Pass plus Celebrations Mew is just going to be a little bit better, or even playing the Hisuian Basculin that has the 0 energy, like Call for Family style attack. Yeah, right now I'm not too stoked on this thing. And the other attack, it's not bad. You can get it off the field with this, but again, if we're not playing this for the first attack right now, I don't think we're playing this for the second. Absolutely not. Alrighty, guys, and getting into the trainer cards of the set, we have Gorgeous Mantle. If the Pokemon this card is attached to does not have a rule box, it gets 100 extra HP, but it does give up an additional prize when it's knocked out. So it's kind of like the inverse of like Hero's Medal, a card kind of like that, or what was the other one before? I think there was another card kind of like that. Oh man, I'm blanking on the name of it right now. But yeah, we've seen effects kind of like this. Even going back further than that, there's the old Expert Belt, which did something kind of similar as well. But I will say I'm not sure how I feel about this card right now, because like there's not a whole lot that's really jumping out to me when it comes to this thing. One of the only neat applications I can really think of is like with the Chilling Rain Gardevoir. This does now open you up to accelerating a lot more energy to that Gardevoir to be able to take one-hit KOs, because of course the big issue with that card is you're capped out at only accelerating 6 energy, unless you have a way to increase that HP or heal off the damage you're doing with your Gardevoir EX. Though, I just don't think that's going to be worth giving up an additional prize. Maybe this could be good for, think of like the the Dondozo from Scarlet and Violet base set, where it's already kind of like a very tanky Pokemon, but it still has probably slightly too few HP to be able to tank a hit. Now, this probably does push you into two-shot territory, and that could be, you know, better at being able to just keep your attackers around a little bit longer. Like, intuitively, it feels like there's probably a use for this that maybe I'm missing, guys. Is there like a Pokemon out there where it's like, if your opponent knocks it out, flip a coin? Like, if Tails, like, they don't get any prizes, maybe something like that could be good with this. But yeah, for the moment, I seem really conflicted on this. I just don't see the big application for this. Is there going to be something that comes along? Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised, but you know, just as my first impressions today, I don't see a lot of really great applications for this, at least not immediately. All right, guys, next up we have the return of TMs into the TCG. So we've actually had TMs in the game before, going back like to the old original EX era from the mid 2000s. So it's been a long time since we've seen these things, even though we have seen kind of similar mechanics in recent years. But you attach this to one of your Pokemon in play. That Pokemon can use this card's attack instead of its own, but you discard it at the end of your turn. So this one is just a colorless energy. You search your deck for up to 2 basic energies and attach them to your bench Pokemon in any way that you like. And then the other one that we have down here, it's 3 colorless energy and does 100 to one of your opponent's Pokemon with any damage counters on it. So right out the gate, I think both these seem okay. I could see a world where a deck could play either of these, but I think this one sort of jumps out to me maybe as being the better of the two. Just because we can easily search this out with something like Arven. And I think you even could make a really cool like first turn play where you go Arven, grab Battle VIP Pass to get your basics, and then grab this as your tool card to be able to charge up one of those Pokemon that you just got onto your bench. And then circling back around to this one, it's kind of like a diet Gmax Rapid Flow, I guess you could say. Again, what deck wants to play this? That's something I'm struggling with. Definitely, it would be a deck that is, I think, based around two-shotting things. This one definitely seems a little bit more mediocre to me. I actually think the better TMs that we're going to be getting are probably actually in Japan's next set, but I think these are fine. Again, the fact that we have Arven, I think, really does help these things out a lot. Again, specifically in the case of this first one, that's the one that right now I would imagine might see a little bit more play, but we'll have to see what happens with them. But still cool to see these come back into the game. TMs have been good in the past, so I'm hoping that we'll see some really creative deck building with these new ones as well. Okay, so we have Larry. This was a card I'm pretty sure that already got revealed way ahead of time, but new supporter, you flip a coin of heads, search your deck for 2 Pokemon, put them into your hand. If tails, search your deck for a basic and put it into your hand. So worst case, you're playing a Nest Ball. Best case, you're getting any 2 Pokemon. But having to play Nest Ball as a supporter feels kind of bad. And also too, like, what deck really wants to do this? I guess with something like Lugia, you can make the argument that, well, if you flip heads, you can get 2 Archeops and put them right into your hand. But, and actually that's a good way to look at this card. It actually is kind of like capturing Aroma in that sense, because if tails, it's exactly like capturing Aroma, but if heads, it's like a slightly better capturing Aroma. And it's a supporter. So it means you're not playing Research, you're not playing Iono, you're not playing Boss. Even capturing Aroma is a card we basically only play out of necessity, not because it's the best search option that we have. So a supporter version of that, I don't think is going to be any more worthwhile to play. Next up we have Chantal. You flip a coin of heads, switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active. If tails, switch in your active with one of your bench Pokemon. So if tails, you're playing Switch. If heads, you're playing Boss. Just play Boss. That's going to be the easier thing to do. Just play 4 Boss's orders. The only way you would ever play this, I think, is if you're going to play more than 4 Boss in a deck for some reason. But I think at that point, you're better off just playing Palpad, because you can get other supporters back as well if you want to. So yeah, I don't think this card is probably ever going to see any play. Okay, so next up we have Rika. So Rika says, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You keep 2 and put the other cards at the bottom of your deck. So this card actually has very big, like, Colress's Experiment vibes to it. Obviously, we would never play this in like a Lost Zone deck because you want the Lost Zone effect of Colress there. But we do see Colress pop up in non-Lost Zone decks from time to time. We've seen it in, like Charizard variants. We've seen it in like Goodra variants, Duraludon variants. So like people do still like the effect of Colress, but Rika in theory could give you a way to get that same effect without having to actually chuck away some of those additional cards. But I will say, sometimes you actually don't really mind getting rid of those cards, and you're only keeping 2, not 3. So I think this is probably still just a little bit weaker than Colress for the moment, unfortunately, guys. I'm also not even sure if I would play this over something like Hop. Yeah, in that case, you're only seeing 3 cards, but you get to keep all 3. I think Rika is probably just a little bit underpowered for my liking, unfortunately. Okay, next up we have Parasol Lady. You shuffle your hand into your deck and get 4 cards, so that's kind of bad. But if you go second and it's your first turn, you draw until you have 8 cards instead. So this is kind of like a spiritual successor to the old Lily Supporter, which actually was a card that did see quite a bit of play, especially towards the end of its lifespan. But there's definitely some big differences. So back then you could play a supporter on turn 1, whereas this is going to be limited to basically just your first turn going second. And really, you don't want to play this card after that. Lily at least let you draw until you had 6, which was a respectable, sort of draw effect. It wasn't great, but it was okay. I don't really ever want to shuffle and get 4. Like, people play Judge to make your opponent get 4 cards because it's such a bad draw effect. So I think this card is a swing and a miss. Like, I know we can Luminion for this thing on turn 1 going second, but I just think it's too bad most of the time. I'd rather just play Research, guys. I think this card isn't too great. And our last card of the set is going to be Medical Energy. So it provides a colorless energy, of course, but when you attach it from hand to one of your Pokemon, you heal 30 from that Pokemon. I don't think this card is that great, but I will at least throw out a couple of ideas for you guys to think about. I think some of the decks that could think about this card at least are going to be decks like Gardevoir or Magma Basin based decks where you're damaging your own Pokemon and maybe putting them within one-shot range. Well, something like Medical Energy can maybe offset that and make your Pokemon a little bit tankier. But I think for your average deck out there, very rarely this would ever change a 2-shot to a 3-shot for your opponent. The only time I could really see this working is if you're playing like a deck based around tanking options. Like, let's say you're playing a Goodra deck that's playing like Lake Acuity, Radiant Serena, then this on top of that. Well, yeah, at that point, you might be able to heal and reduce enough damage to where it is a meaningful amount, but I just feel like we don't have really many decks like that running around right now. So this card isn't going to be too good, and it still does have to contend with the likes of V-Guard, Jet Energy, Gift Energy. So yeah, probably not the best time for this card to shine, unfortunately. But that's going to do it for all of the cards from Raging Surf today. I definitely think there are a good handful of cards that are worth getting excited about. I think easily the best card of the set is going to be Jirachi, just because of how oppressive it might be able to be towards those Sableye decks. But with that being said, what do you guys think about these cards today? What is your favorite new reveal that we saw? And always, if you did enjoy today's content, remember to smack that like button. Or if you're feeling a little extra generous, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.